We have seen some incredible transformations over the years here at the Exam Room Podcast. People who you wouldn't give a second chance to have been able to turn their health around. They may have been facing heart disease or cancer, high cholesterol, diabetes. They've been able to get their health back on track. It's been extraordinary. And one of the common themes throughout many of these stories is food addiction. The inability to stop eating unhealthy foods. And people will say, well, can you really be addicted to food the same way you could be drugs or alcohol? The answer to that question is yes. In fact, it's a big part of my story as well. When I was 420 pounds and eating 10,000 calories every single day, I was way out of control, both with what I was eating and my portion sizes. I was having this overwhelming compulsion to just eat and eat and eat and eat. And from the outside looking in, people will say, well, he's just lazy. He's choosing to do this. But from my standpoint and from the standpoint of others who have struggled, it's an addiction that we battle on a daily basis. And there's emerging science to prove that this addiction is very, very real. And that's what we'll be exploring today on this Exam Room Flashback with Dr. Neal Barnard.
It's real. It was a controversial thing in the world of psychiatry. Can you really be addicted to foods in the same ways you could be addicted to heroin? And some people wanted to say no. And I have to say, the experience of the user, very soon people say, wait a minute, all the indices of addiction, I've got them. It's something that's cyclical. It's something that I crave when it's not there. It's something I'm preoccupied with. It's something I hide. And something I'm paying a physical price for. So anyway, what really happened was maybe 20 years ago or somewhere thereabouts, psychiatrists started to say, all right, chocolate. We'll give you chocolate. That can be addictive. but then that opened kind of the floodgates to other things. But I got to tell you, Chuck, it is not strawberries. It is not oranges and apples. So a person doesn't get up at night and go to the 7-Eleven and get 25 apples and eat them, or a bushel of asparagus. It's certain foods that we do tend to get hooked on.
What are some of the more addictive ones? You know, I'd like to think that Americans can sometimes be a slave to the burger. So what are some of the more addictive foods?
I'm going to give you 4. Number 1, sugar. And you could see this in a newborn baby. Yes, you have a little baby born today. And let's say you're in the hospital and you're going to do a little heel stick to draw a drop of blood for a blood test. If you dribble sugar water into the baby's mouth just before you do the heel stick, the baby cries less. Now, I'm not suggesting this as a form of anesthesia, but it's been widely recognized by people in healthcare that sugar is sort of a painkiller. And then pretty soon, grandparents know that if you've got the sugary stuff, when the kids come over, they want to visit grandma and grandpa more often. And then when you're an adult, you're not having the same sugary goo that maybe a child might have. Or are we? We have it with sodas and so forth. Sugar, that's number 1. Number 2, chocolate really is addicting, but it's not just that it's sugary. There are other compounds in chocolate. There is sugar. There is something called theobromine, which is sort of like caffeine, only it's a slight variant on caffeine. It's a mild stimulant. If you have a dog and the dog says, don't give your dog chocolate, it can kill him, that's the theobromine. That can do it.
Okay.
And there are other compounds in the chocolate. So that's my number 2 addictive.
But does that go for straight cacao as well? Because I know that's a popular additive in smoothies is straight 100% cacao powder.
Here's the problem with that. Here's why that's of less concern. If you want to make chocolate addictive, you got to go beyond just straight chocolate because it's rather bitter. It's just an ingredient, and in fact. Interesting history fact, it was not until about 1850 or thereabouts that people actually made chocolate tolerable. The Native American populations had chocolate that Columbus brought back to Europe, a bitter substance that they made beverages out of, not really racing for stardom here. But what happened in the middle of the 1800s is that people found that if you mix a little more of the cocoa butter and you add a sweetener, like some chocolate, and something to kind of tone it down, like vanilla, Now we got something ready for prime time. But to this day, the chocolate manufacturers are always figuring out what's the right combination of ingredients to get you hooked. Number 3, cheese. Cheese actually has opiates in it.
Yeah, no surprise you wrote The Cheese Trap.
Well, that's because we want to know why the heck is this addictive? And there are opiate chemicals in the casein protein in milk, which are concentrated in cheese, that attach to the same receptors of the brain that heroin attaches to.
Wow.
And number 4 is meat. You can give an opiate-blocking drug to Hank, and suddenly this meat-addicted guy likes meat less.
Wow.
And by the way, the opiate-blocking drug is not a treatment. It's a research tool that we use to separate what are addictive, what are brain-active foods and which are not. So sugar, chocolate, cheese, meat, and I might say also just anything with a lot of fat and a lot of salt. Potato chips, onion rings, cheeses in that category too. We tend to get hooked on those. All of them, all these things I just mentioned, go to the brain, trigger the release of dopamine in the brain, and you can see the brain scans light right up, which is not going to do so much with brown rice and a potato and healthy foods. Those foods are good, but they aren't going to drive your brain into the excessive brain activity.
What about people who don't necessarily have an addictive personality? Do they still have the same risk for developing that sugar addiction, that addiction to cheese?
Yes, I think so. Now, there's a couple things. We used to say it was all personality, and the whole idea was your parents' fault, or you had a bad upbringing. You were traumatized, whatever, and so now this is your comfort food. I think half of that is true. I think the truth is this is a comforting food, but you can have had the most wonderful Partridge Family upbringing, and you can still be addicted to anything. And that's partly for the reason I was mentioning earlier, is the manufacturers are trying to figure out how to make foods attractive. In the same way as, I don't care who you are. I don't care what your upbringing was like. Can you get hooked on tobacco if you light up? Yes.
Of course.
Of course you will. And that's true for most people. But let me take this one step further. We were doing a research study a number of years ago, and I was struck by how many people would crave cheese and so forth. Everybody happened to have diabetes in the study. I did blood tests, and I found a single gene that caused these people to have too little dopamine activity in their brain. They were born with that gene. And it turned out that they had an exaggerated response to junk food because it would give them the dopamine that they were missing. So if you don't have that gene and you're getting dopamine activity normally, you are less set up for addiction. If you have this gene that gives you too few dopamine receptors in the brain, which is what it's doing, then you want anything to stimulate those dopamine receptors, which can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it could be compulsive gambling. And it can be junk food. Yeah.
It is for so many. So, new year, new you, we're trying to better ourselves. What's the best way to start to break that addictive pattern? I know that some people are advocates of going cold turkey, other people taper off. What do you find is the best method there?
I think everybody finds their own way. I have to say, personally, I think that getting to zero is what you want to do, as opposed to moderation. Okay, cheese isn't so good, but I should have it in moderation.
Right.
If you are having an unhealthy food extremely rarely and you're paying no price for it and it's not hurting your life at all, okay. But on the other hand, if you've got weight you're trying to lose, if your diabetes is getting out of control, let's take this seriously. And in the same way as it's easier to quit smoking completely than to have a cigarette on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just easier. It is so much easier to go to a completely vegan diet and leave that meat aside, leave that cheese aside, than to have it dangling in front of you every now and then. Why? Because when you have it again, it reawakens all the memories, all the taste buds, all the desire, which had gone to sleep.
Yeah.
Imagine if you're a smoker and you quit, it's 2 months, 2 months have gone by, you're no longer hooked, and you're thinking about it less and less and less and less and less. Light up once, and it all comes back, and it's the same with food. So some people will think, all right, vegan diet's got to be tough. Not really very tough. And the beauty of it is it allows you to just get some distance from the things that are hurting you.
And, the cool part, though, I think that when I broke through to the other side was just the confidence that I gained from really accomplishing something that was tremendously difficult. So I think then that there's a great positive mental upside to breaking this addiction as well.
The payoff is huge. We did a study a few years ago with Geico, the car insurance company, and the study was focusing on weight loss and diabetes, but we gave questionnaires to people to rate their mood, depression, anxiety in particular, and also things like job absenteeism. Those things got better too. That wasn't the target of it, but it was either there's something magical about this food, or there's something magical about feeling the health return to your body.
Yeah.
The weight loss is coming off, my blood sugar is going down. I've got power and I've got control that I didn't have before.
If you feel like you've raised your health IQ by a point or two, be sure to like this video and subscribe to us here on YouTube. And bonus points if you head over to Apple Podcast or Spotify, look for the Exam Room Podcast by the Physicians Committee and subscribe there. And please also leave a 5-star rating. And for today, that, my friend, is all the time that we have. For everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We'll talk to you again soon, but until then, keep it plant-based.